I'm sure you all follow the park closely enough that you know there's a lot of park out there in terms of acreage and visitation, so this isn't going to be everything that's happening out there. But it's kind of the top, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that people tend to ask us about, at least as far as I hear. Once I'm done with those, we'll open it up for just general Q&A. Maybe for Q&A, we can start by trying to keep it Saline Valley specific, and then we can broaden out a little bit more. We'll probably have like maybe 15 minutes of Q&A in this setting, and then we'll conclude the meeting, but all of us will still be here for a while, so you can just remember if you have a question about the tubs, go find Alyssa. If you have a question about how law enforcement will take place, go find Jessica. So try to remember which person your question applies to in case we run out of time. But a few of the things I want to talk about have already come up briefly, but I want to go over them a little bit more. So the first one is the military jet crash that took place back on July 31st. So a quick recap of that was about 9:30 in the morning. There was a call over the radio that there was a plume of smoke over by Panamint Springs up in the area where jets do testing, and there may be a plane crash. The Park Service does not manage the jets in that area, as you probably all know, so we contacted China Lake, which is where most of our communication takes place. China Lake is a military base, has very discrete structures, and so sometimes they don't communicate across those structures very quickly. So the first people we contacted directly said, oh, we don't know about it, we'll find out. And very quickly it became apparent that there was a military jet crash up there. We had a ranger who was not too far away when that took place, and he got to the scene and reported that there were injured visitors, still fires burning. And so working with all of our partners, which includes like county sheriff, fire departments, things like that, other agencies, basically we called for anybody and everybody that could come to come. And law enforcement could probably get more specific than that, but we weren't sure exactly what it was going to be, how many injuries there might be. So a lot of people started coming towards the scene, and the rangers on the scene got a better size up of it and reported that there's just these 7 visitors that are injured, non-life threatening. Now, non-life threatening, that's still a big range of how bad injuries can be, right? But there wasn't anything immediately life threatening. So we started scaling back the resources a little bit. I believe most of the fire trucks were called off because in that area there's not a whole lot that can burn vegetation-wise and structures, things like that. Over the course of the next several hours, the military dispatched some of their rescue services, and very quickly it became kind of managed in 2 ways. So the Park Service managed the park portion of it. What's happening to the visitors? What's happening with the press regarding Death Valley National Park? The military completely took over everything related to the actual search for the pilot, what happened with the crash, and more or less since then, that's the way it's continued to be divided. So probably most of you know, but the pilot unfortunately did not survive that. He was a 33-year-old Navy lieutenant based out of Lemoore. They have not released any findings they have, at least Rob, not that I know of. So we don't know, was it plane malfunction, was it equipment, was it person, was something else happened? We just don't know. I don't know that we'll ever know, but they haven't released anything to us yet. Any of you that traveled by that area over the next amount of time, including up till today, there have been closures in place. So immediately we closed down all of the Father Crowley parking lot and Padre Point, which is the dirt road that spurs off of that, for the search and initial investigation. After they did their initial collection of evidence and everything else they needed, we opened Father Crowley, but Padre Point remains closed as they continue to pick up all the smaller pieces and fragments. And I don't think we have an exact timeline on when that will open. But that was a major event. It got a lot of kind of publicity in July, and has been something we continue to work on with partners to manage the cleanup of it. The next topic I have is marijuana. Marijuana is kind of an interesting topic. In fact, when we mention Death Valley, a lot of people think we're going to discuss whether it's legal to smoke in the park. And no, it's not. But more importantly, we want to talk about how much of an issue it actually is impacting Death Valley National Park. So I want to make sure I get these numbers right. So since 2012, the park has discovered 9 separate marijuana grows within Death Valley National Park boundaries. They tend to be in isolated canyons and elevations between 3,000 and 8,000 feet. Sorry?
A good growing place.
Apparently, yes. They're especially good if you don't care about the environment and just dump all sorts of pesticides and herbicides and anything else you can on it. And that's the case. So there's things put on these plants that are illegal in the United States. They're brought in They're horrible for the environment, for any native wildlife, or for any people that might also want to be drinking that water as part of your hike. So the main threats are directly to the plants and animals in that area, but there's very much a carryover effect that can last in some cases potentially for years, depending on what chemicals are being used, to any humans that come through as well. There's also a fear of what would happen if one of us was walking through a canyon by ourselves and ran into one of these grows and the people that were working it. So far, I'm not aware of any violence that's taken place, but certainly it's something that we're very concerned about eventually happening. Okay, so I mentioned there's been 9 grows that we know of in Death Valley. Does anybody want to wager a guess on the street value of the drugs that we think have come out of Death Valley in that time, or has come out or would have come out had we not got there in time to eradicate it?
$1 million. 12 million.
$160 million worth of marijuana has come out of the park. And again,
Brand it, sell people, come on.
so again, that's money going to organizations that I'm guessing most of us wouldn't prefer our money's going to. So it's a major issue when we talk about it. One of the problems we run into quite often when we discuss this issue is people say like, oh, my neighbor grows marijuana in his backyard, we don't care about that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that will overtake a spring. You know, imagine this if we weren't here and they planted acres and acres and acres worth of marijuana and just denuded the vegetation, stripped it all clean, terraced it out, brought in that black PVC piping and just dumped chemicals on it for year after year until they're pushed out. So it's a huge impact to the park, and it's something we're still grappling with. We do not have like a separate stream of money that says, here, go solve your marijuana problem, so it's up to the existing staff we have. But thankfully they do work with other federal and local partners when there is a known grow to go in and eradicate it and try to clean it up, excuse me. And those are 2 very separate things. It's, you know, one thing to push people out and like whack down all the plants that are there growing, but because they've been dumping a lot of nasty stuff on it, it's not something that we can just say like, hey, who wants to go volunteer to clean up marijuana sites, because we don't want to expose people to greater risk. So it's a long-term issue to deal with these. Next topic I have is Scotty's Castle. It's already come up a few times, but right now our projected opening, and I would not book any hotels off of this projection, is October of 21. A lot of people are curious about why it's taking so long, and there's kind of a few different answers, not one simple summary. One of them that sounds like it's just a talking point, but is very true, is we're trying to do it the right way. So if we just wanted to open as fast as we could have, it probably could be open right now, but it wouldn't be in the long-term interest of visitors or the site, because it would be rushing to put things in without monitoring. Are there endangered species here? Are we putting something right back where it's just going to wash out in the next flood? So part of it is because we're being very, very methodical. Another issue is we did not get a chunk of money from Congress saying, here's $50 million, go fix Scotty's Castle. In fact, Mike might be able to attest to this better, but I believe it's the biggest natural disaster in a national park not to have received a separate chunk of funding to deal with it. So what it means is all the money that you're paying when you come into Death Valley and you're buying your passes, we're slowly collecting that $30 at a time, and then we say, okay, here's $5 million to rebuild the utility system. And we collect your $30 at a time and say, here's $6 million for the next project. And so it's slow going because we have to build up the money in a lot of cases, and it's not entirely entrance fees, but that is a big portion of it. What that really means, though, is we cannot hire one general contractor and say, here, design everything and build everything. We have to hire one firm to design one aspect, another firm to design another aspect, and then one contractor to build that first one. And we're trying to package those together as best we can, but it's difficult when you don't have the cash to pay up front. There's also the balance of, because it is a historic site, we want to make sure, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're doing it the right way and not further impacting the site. We don't want it to be worse after we put all this money in than before we started. Some of the changes that we know will take place is there's going to be flood walls that go in around the site. So if you go visit it, in particular, you might remember outside of the visitor center, there's that long water courseway that actually looks kind of similar to here. There's some palm trees, some flowing water. There's going to be a flood wall between that and the visitor center, so if water does come down again, it'll get diverted around the buildings rather than just slamming into them. So there still will be some noticeable changes, again, for the long-term preservation of the site. Let's see, so some of the current work that's going on out there is the road and the utilities. So we're trying as best we can to put the utilities under the road to shield them a little bit more. The next projects we're going to be working on are underground storage tanks. This was something I didn't know about until fairly recently, but it's a pretty big deal. at almost every site you go to, people at some point needed fuel there. So quite often they would bury those tanks and then eventually walk away from them. And lots of times you don't even know they're there until something unfortunate happens, like it collapses in or something. So I believe we're aware of 5 of those tanks at Scotty's Castle, and they take a while to kind of clean and seal properly, so we're working on taking care of those. And then soon, hopefully soon, construction on the actual visitor center will begin. Some of us may have different ideas about which building the visitor center is, depending on when you were last there, but if you imagine you park in the parking lot, there's one long building in front of you. The very left-hand portion of that, which for a while was a gift shop, is the visitor center that's being rebuilt. So hopefully in 2021, that facility will be one of the first places to open. It might not have exhibits or anything inside, but there will at least be a ranger and a desk to answer any questions. Let's see, some of the work that they've already completed, I believe, was armoring the bridge area. So what I mean by armoring is, imagine you have a road or an area you're afraid is going to flood out. What we would do is scrape away the dirt down several feet and then put in like gabion baskets. So that's when you make a big box out of chain link fence and then fill it with boulders so that it can't wash away. Other places they almost use like concrete blocks and things like that. So depending on what type of flooding they're expecting, they use different techniques, but all that happened around the old historic entrance gate. So it usually had its double gates swung shut, but a lot of you, it's probably the first thing you see when you're coming up on the site. That area had a lot of the flood buildup smash into it, so it caused a lot of erosion. I believe it actually even moved that entire concrete structure a couple of inches, so we've been re-armoring that. And then putting up those historic fence posts, some of those had to be replaced, so they're the ones that say S and J on it for the line of fence. I believe that project has been completed as well. All right, segue to the next topic. So Mike mentioned that Death Valley has increased in acreage this year, and there's been 2 main ways that's happened. The biggest one was the Dingle Act, and another one was through donations through the Mojave Desert Land Trust. So I'll mention that one since it's actually got more applicability out here first. That is a nonprofit group that works with willing landowners inside of national parks. So quite often what happens is you might own a piece of land that maybe you've never even been to or only been to a couple times, but your father or your grandfather used to work out there. It might not mean anything to you personally anymore, you don't want to live there, you don't really see any economic interest in it. So this Mojave Desert Land Trust would approach you and say, would you be willing to sell that for us to then turn over to the National Park Service? So they're kind of an intermediary between private landowners and us, and they acquire land, again, always from willing donors, and eventually sell it over to the National Park. So this year they've donated 680 acres. The biggest chunk of land is down south in the Owl's Head, so extreme southern into Death Valley, a little over 300 acres down there. But what might be of more interest to everybody here is they donated 80 acres of the actual Saline Valley salt flat area. So again, for us, in the context of 3.4 million acres, 80 acres might not seem like a big deal. But part of the reason we're always concerned about that is like, what if somebody decides they want to put a giant billboard that says like, go away or something like that. So it's a lot more about maintaining the continuity of the land and the feel around it necessarily than the pure acreage. The bigger act, though, that I mentioned, the John Dingle Act, is a recreation act that was passed earlier in the year. A lot of us see it as the California Desert Protection Act Part 2. So the original one, which again brought this into Death Valley National Park, was in '94. This is a very similar act. It brought 35,000 acres of new land into Death Valley. Do you all remember looking at the map of Death Valley, and up at the north end there's this weird circle